have the letter out?
Within 10
Oh,
days.
less than that, I'd guess.
The meeting,
Yeah.
10 minutes? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Wally, good?
Oh, good.
Good evening, board members and residents. I would like to call to order our regular board meeting for Monday, October 26, 2015. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Batanti.
Here.
Mr. Brado is asked to be excused. Mr. Capral.
Here.
Mr. Tominello.
Here.
Mr. York.
Here.
Mr. Witt here. Mr. Verkest.
Here. Next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, including the approval of the regular board meeting and public hearing minutes of October 13th, 2015, approval of the bills in the amount of $697,707.12, approval of the September 2015 revenue and expenditure report, and approval to use smart buses for McRest at Trinity Lutheran Church, December 20th through 26th, 2015, and St. Hubert Catholic Church, January 10th through the 17th, 2016. Is there a motion? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the agenda is read.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Batanti with support by Mr. Tominello to approve the consent agenda. A discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next is the approval of the regular agenda. I didn't hear any proposals for any revisions, so if there are none, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the regular agenda as presented.
So moved.
All right, is there support?
Support.
Got a motion by Mr. Capral, a support by Mr. Batanti to approve the regular agenda. Discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next is announcements. I'd like everybody to know that the Harrison Township Veteran Memorial program will be held Saturday, November 7th, in about almost 2 weeks at 1 p.m. It'll be right here in this boardroom in the hall here. It's a chance to honor our community's veterans. The event will be held rain or shine, November 7th, 1 p.m. I believe we're adding 9 names to the memorial. And of course, for that event and for any other township event, you can call the supervisor's office, 466-1445, or visit the website harrison-township.org. I know also we had an event Saturday for Parks and Rec. Mr. Capral?
We did. We had our annual Hollowpalooza Trunk or Treat event. Fairly well attended considering the weather was a little threatening, but we probably had about 75 kids, 75 to 100 kids. And just like to thank a few people that did help out in the event. Mr. Verkest did some reconnaissance for us, and then Mr. Brado was there at the event, very helpful, and some members of my family and my wife. I'd like to thank her as usual, and also like to thank all the residents that came out. It's a free event. We'd like to have more people, so maybe next year we'll have 200 kids.
Was Bill?
Uh,
Did you say no? Oh, good. All right. Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for the effort that you put in. It's a great event, and thanks to all the Parks and Rec Committee members. Any other announcements? All right. Next on our agenda.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
One
sure.
more item.
Yep.
The next Parks and Rec event is the Christmas tree lighting, and that will be December 1st, and that will take place here at Rosa Hall and out front in the by the Veterans Memorial. We have the high school choir that comes out and sings, and the band that plays inside the building. It's really a nice event. So I'd like to see everybody come out.
And good chance Santa Claus might be there.
There's a good chance he may show up.
Well, let's hope so. All right, next on our agenda is item B, from the clerk's office, Mr. Witt.
Yes, board members, the clerk's office received a request, from Mr. Blake DiCarlo, president of the Eastside Rugby Football Club. He and his organization are requesting a resolution acknowledging that they are a nonprofit organization operating out of our township. They stated their primary purpose for this is for charitable gaming to support their organization, and they also support several charities with any excess funds, I guess. If the board adopts the resolution, it'll be returned to the Eastside Rugby Club to be included in their application to the state of Michigan for their charitable gaming license. The resolution must be approved by the township board prior to the state taking action on the grant, on granting the gaming license.
All right. Any questions, discussion, or is there a motion?
I didn't talk to this gentleman. I'd assume, Adam, you did. I'll assume that everything was in New Baltimore and he moved to Harrison Township, it looks like.
Yeah, he used to live there, moved here
Probably
recently.
needs to change, update the,
That's just when
address.
they issued the original stuff,
From 2012.
2014.
Well, I see the
2012.
letter from the
Yeah,
IRS was 2012.
And there's some stuff from 2014,
Right.
that's the same address, so.
Make a motion to adopt the resolution that the Eastside Rugby Football Club, Harrison Township, County Macomb, recognizing that they are a nonprofit organization operating in Harrison Township, and that the state consider for approval for a charitable gaming license.
We've got a motion by Mr. Tominello. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Capral. Discussion, board members?
oh, wait a minute. Let me, I don't understand why we have documents from June 20th, 2014 that still have a New Baltimore address on it.
Cause it's 2015, I mean, I think his
Oh,
move was recent.
okay, yeah, all right. It is 2015.
Yeah,
Okay,
Okay,
never mind.
good.
No
Yeah,
problem.
actually, you can see their most recent financial statement from the bank does have a Harrison Township address, so.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yep.
Looked through this afternoon.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem.
One of them did.
All right, any other discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor
excuse me,
signify.
no, we
Oh.
need a roll call,
Oh,
Mr. Supervisor.
resolution, I'm sorry. Will you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. Capral?
Yes.
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Brado is excused, Mr. York?
Yes,
Mr. Witt, yes, Mr. Verkust.
Yes, thank you. Next on our agenda is item C1 from the accounting office. I don't know if you want to speak
Yeah,
to that?
absolutely. Under the Affordable Care Act, as an employer, we're required to submit certain forms to the IRS regarding our employee health insurance coverage. The forms for an organization our size are a 1094C and a 1095C. They're similar to like a W-2, but we need to send a copy to the employee, send a copy to the IRS. Mr. Spencer, our finance director, spoke to some of his peers and saw that some people were going one route of hiring an outside contractor to do it. And he received estimates in the $2,000 to $7,000 range, or purchasing software to do that, to generate the forms. The township's already paid for the BSNA HR module, which will give us the capability to print these forms. Basically, we had stopped paying the maintenance fee because we weren't using it as much, but this would bring us up to date with the most recent version of the form, or of the software, allow us to print these forms in-house, and then going forward, we'd have the ongoing annual maintenance fee added to our BSNA package. It's a cost of $18.60 as opposed to outsourcing it for a little bit more, considerably more, depending on the vendor.
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of the human resource software module from BSNA Software in the amount of $1,860.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. York. Is there a second?
Support.
All right, support by Mr. Witt. And this is, just making sure, a one-time,
This is this year's payment of the annual maintenance.
Okay.
Basically, it's the reinstatement of the software. They'll send out an update. SYO has said that they'll install the update. We've already worked with the program, so we don't need the training, Glenn felt.
okay?
But, there's always tools online that he thought he'd be able to pick up anything he didn't need on-site training for it, so.
Gotcha.
And then, but then going forward, it would
Yep.
be $18.60 a year again.
Okay, gotcha. So this is gonna be an annual fee, but it gives us more than just the ability to produce these documents.
Yes.
Right. And inevitably, we're likely gonna have to pay that fee at some point anyways for,
Right,
maintenance.
yeah, when this was, adding this with it's a pretty robust thing, it's still cheaper than paying an outside firm to print 2 forms for us.
Yep. Sounds good. All right, any other discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we have a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Witt to approve the purchase of the HR software module from the BS&A. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next, item D1 from the clerk's office.
Man, the last couple of meetings, everything's been me.
Yeah.
Our 3-year agreement with our auditor concluded with the successful completion of our 2004 fiscal year audit. Stuart Beauvais Whipple, our current auditor, has submitted a proposal for with a couple different options. One was a 1-year extension or a 2-year contract with an option for a 3rd year in there. When we were looking at it, we felt the 2-year agreement would give the township some consistency as we transition to a new finance director next year, and also at the end of next year, there's the potential for changes at the board level with the 2016 elections. We were looking at it and we thought it might make sense to have some stability in the auditor position to make sure, there's a good passage of information for the next couple years. The cost for 2015 is $38,000. It will not exceed $38,000, and it's approximately a 5% increase over what we paid this year, which was $36,300. And then the 16 and 17 would go up by either the rate of inflation, but not to exceed 3% per year. So I think inflation this year was 0.1%. So.
But now there's a note here. If you elect to extend the contract for 2 years with a 3rd-year option,
Yeah.
then it would be less, right?
Correct.
So we're proposing, just so that, to make sure that I.
36.3
Yeah,
plus
36.3.
3% a year after, right?
Afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's a
then,
deal. That gives us less than what.
yeah, and so we
just
would,
doing it for this year.
yeah, and we have to add on $3,000 on top of it just to cover the new GASB reporting requirements for pensions. That's a change in the law as far as what we have to include. So that you would have to add on under this 36,300, the $3,000, and then also there's the additional fee that we've if we have any expenditures in excess of $500,000 in federal money, which I don't see happening, they'd have to do an audit for those funds, but that's included in there, but it's not necessary at this point.
Right, it would be presumptive, overly presumptive to approve that, but the recommendation is the years 15 and 16 for 39.3 the first year, and up to a 3% increase in the second year.
Correct.
Right? Okay. And I'll say, we was sat with Mr. Bailey from Stewart, Bouvet, and Whipple, and we kind of thought through the process of saying, okay, well, we want to get through this next year. We're looking at a scenario where Mr. Spencer's indicated that he'd be willing to assist our new finance director with that process. But then, maybe in that second year, when that finance director is doing this audit on his or her own, it might be good to have the consistency of the same auditor through that process. And then after a 2-year period, if the board sees fit to make a change, or if the incoming finance director has a particular preference or some other idea, we would have had 2 years of continuity. Suggesting that we wouldn't go for a longer period of time has absolutely nothing to do with my opinion, and I don't think anyone else's opinion of Stewart, Bouvet, and Whipple. I think they've done an excellent job. And we'd even asked the question, You know, is there any logic in saying, well, we should change, you know, auditing firms from time to time and, you know, get a fresh set of eyes? We have had during our contracted time with Stewart, Bouvet and Whipple, 2 different lead auditors, and that does give some different, you know, approach. So we literally have somebody new from Stewart, Bouvet and Whipple, you know, with a fresh set of eyes looking at our procedures and our books. So I think there's some value there, but I think we should look at the suggested motion.
Make a motion to approve the 2-year contract with the 3rd-year option for audit services with Stuart Bouvet and Whipple as presented.
All right, is there support?
Support.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. by Mr. York, with support by Mr. Witt to approve the 2-year contract with a 3rd-year option. Any discussion?
Could we just go over once, because I kind of got lost in the numbers, please?
Yep.
So what did we pay do we have what we paid in 14? Mr. Witt?
36.3.
And,
That'll be the same for the 15 audit.
all right, so 15 is 36.3.
For the base price for the audit.
Understood.
They added an additional, the GASB requires an
Okay.
additional portions of $3,000
All
on
right.
top.
Okay, so that's 15, and then the additional year in 16, it can be raised by the rate of inflation or 3%.
Right, and we're committing to 15 and 16.
Understood.
We have an option for 17.
Understood, okay, thank you.
And, yeah, so, all
Okay,
right,
thanks.
all right. Any other discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we have a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Witt to approve the 2-year contract with a 3rd-year option for audit services with Stewart, Bouvet and Whipple as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next on the agenda, item 2, and it was brought by the clerk, Mr. Witt.
Yeah, at our last regular board meeting, the board introduced an ordinance to repeal ordinance number 306 in its entirety, entitled our zoning ordinance, codified as Appendix A, Sections 1 through 23, and to adopt ordinance number 307 entitled zoning ordinance. If the board adopts the zoning ordinance, it'll be effective immediately upon publication unless we say otherwise. You have before you the corrections that were made based on the one error and then the board's direction for the marijuana. So those changes have been made and will be in the correct.
I'll make an ordinance to repeal, I make a motion to, repeal ordinance 306 in its entirety. Zoning ordinance codified as Appendix A, Sections 1.00 through 23.0. And adopt ordinance number 307 entitled zoning ordinance, and to,
Publish, I'm sorry.
sorry,
That's a typo.
and to publish a notice, of adoption at the Charter Township of Harrison. Full text may be reviewed in the clerk's office, 8 to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Batanti. All right, discussion, board members.
Yeah, I just noticed, I voted no, Adam, on that, by the way. I don't know, you might wanna go look at the, looking at the introduction on this page here,
Sure.
I voted no, just so you know.
So you need to go revisit the consent agenda then
Yeah.
to correct that for the minutes.
Okay, that's all right. So that would have been the October 13 minutes?
Yeah,
Let me just-
let's finish this one.
Absolutely, I just
That's
wanna
fine,
pull those
yeah.
out so that I know we have a correction to make.
Yeah, cause I didn't like that 11.19.
No problem.
Medical marijuana, section, and once again, I don't think we should be allowing grow operations anywhere in the city.
Gotcha. All right. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll open the floor for public comment.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. At your last board meeting, you basically added a change to this ordinance concerning medical marijuana. And my understanding is that that should have went back to the planning commission first, which it never did. and that you basically proceeded forward with it at the last meeting. And the other part of my comment is, what you're telling me in this is that now that has been incorporated into this ordinance inside here at 1119. Again, I question the procedure. The zoning ordinance is supposed to be vetted by the planning commission. It never was. And you guys went ahead and changed it. And I believe that was an improper procedure, and may create an issue where you will have a challenge to that particular part of the ordinance in sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. So I'll try to address that the best that I can. I apologize, I cannot recall the date, but this board held a joint workshop between the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees. Prior to this discussion, we'd had discussions with the township attorney about the issue of where we would allow for the production of medical marijuana within our zoning ordinance. The advice that we'd received from the attorney was that this is a very dynamic subject, and are addressing it at the state level, but at the same time, we're dealing with the issue because we're aware of the fact that the production of marijuana is occurring in the industrial zone. So we discussed this particular subject at length with the Planning Commission, and ultimately, the adoption of this is not up to the Planning Commission, it's up to the Board of Trustees. We're the ones who adopt this zoning ordinance. But we did have lengthy discussions with the Planning Commission as well as the Township Planner. And there was a discussion of saying, well, if you're putting it in the industrial zone, are you then implying that it's okay for large-scale production? But at the same time, we're saying, well, we're aware of facilities that are doing this already, but we're finding that it's difficult to enforce the issue. So it really came back to a question of saying that if we receive a legal opinion that says that our ordinance has to, based on the current law, not what law may be coming from the state, says we may be able to prohibit it, but based on the current legal advice we have to allow it somewhere. So when a resident comes to us and says, well, currently there's a grow operation occurring next to my home, and we say, well, yeah, that's right, because that's what our ordinance requires, we're saying that just doesn't seem like we wouldn't have a stamping operation next to your home or some other thing in a residential zone. So the discussion that we had with the Planning Commission was that this is kind of a regulatory portion of the ordinance, and if we're adopting it, there is no additional cost to make a change from residential to industrial at this time. We did seek legal opinion from the attorney before we did it. He gave us the answer and said, yep, I would say go ahead. He said, no matter what you do, there's a group of folks that are really strong on these medical marijuana issues, and you face a potential for some pretty strong and expensive legal fights depending on how you go about this. I don't know if there's anything you have to share, Mr. Huth, or if you feel like we're in the wrong or we're okay,
No,
or what?
I agree, and I really agree with the resident, Mr. Senstock's point. Right, these things are vetted through the planning commission typically, and that is what's happened here. You had input, they are, at the end of the day, recommending body, and then you guys make the decision. So I think you're straight on point here.
Okay.
So I do have a question, Mr. Huth. If the state, so here we go with these technicalities, by not having anything right now, it sort of just let things happen.
That's not what we have right now. We have an ordinance that says it can
Our
be
ordinance says
residential
it's
areas.
residential only.
Okay. And that conforms with the law, where you have these caregivers and this. Now we're moving to industrial, big grow operation, okay? That being said, it's not what if the state, it's my understanding, that the state is enacting laws that they're gonna allow the local government to make the rules. Is my understanding from hundreds of posts that I get from different state reps, state senators, my conversations, and that is probably gonna pass. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. By us doing this now, we sort of allow people to go and do this because we've said they can do it. Now, if we want to change later, you can't go back. Now we have a lawsuit. That's where I lose the
The way-
lawsuit.
The way the
But-
law is written right now, the way it's passed through the House, it gives community, what happens, and we were talking to the MTA rep acts as our lobbyist at the state. What they said was that the communities are given a period of time after the law goes into effect where they have to make a decision about what they're going to allow in their community.
Well, we're making that decision
No, we're
now.
not,
is
because the
my
law
point.
doesn't
Well,
exist yet. It requires an action by the board after the law goes into effect, is the way she explained it. She said communities have been taking steps intermediately, and they wanted to make sure that something that what you're talking about, it requires an affirmative action to allow after the law goes into effect.
Okay.
That was her explanation.
Okay, so I allow somebody now, under this ordinance, to go and have a grow operation in the industrial corridor. The state comes in and says, well, communities, you can do whatever you want now. So I decide, no, I don't want those grow operations anymore. So I go back to this guy in the industrial corridor and say, I'm sorry, you spent all this money here. We've decided not to allow that, and I'm not gonna get sued. I just don't buy that.
Well, you have to keep in mind that a lot of the battleground really isn't over the grow operation because it's only limited to so many plants per patients that you're caring for. The real battleground is with the dispensaries. And I think that's where you're gonna see the public, concern about where those are gonna end up. So the litigation that Mr. Witt's talking about and you've mentioned is primarily not to what you're describing, but how are we gonna handle as a community that when people have storefronts with this type of, product, the marijuana, how are we gonna handle it? And that's what, we're gonna be able to set forth rules, and I think that's where you're gonna really wanna zero in on it. I think when you look at it in terms of what you have now, not a good situation, where are we gonna allow these caregivers to go? Seems to make more sense to have it in an industrial area, and I don't think you can get away with, yeah, I can say that. I don't think you can get away with saying it's not gonna be anywhere. So this, I think.
Under current law.
Under current law. This gives you the best.
I guess I'm saying if somebody's a caregiver and they're growing a couple pot plants in their house, who really cares? You know, that's their business, right?
But that's
You
an
know,
enforcement
the-
issue.
You know,
We're talking about folks who are
Right.
taking homes and gutting them and having huge operations that are no longer being
but
used for
that
residential
but that
purposes.
clearly, because you got it and it's no longer residential, you can't have a grow operation in a residential area under those circumstances, period, anyways.
Well, they say what they claim to have all these patients, and the problem with it is, Darren, the first example you described, right, not really an issue because it's almost like no harm, no foul.
Right.
But the other one is an issue. Neighbors start hearing about it because there's so much, I should say smelling it, there's so much in the house that it comes out of the house, and then you got people complaining, and you don't have the ability to say, wait, we said this is allowed in a,
But that violates, I mean, there's, you know, that's a residential area, people are supposed to be living there, you know, it's like somebody, it's like, whatever, company, ABC company goes and buys a house in the subdivision and puts a big, stamping machine in it.
Right, but we don't allow that. We don't allow stamping in a residential area with our zoning ordinance, but we do currently allow the growth and propagation of marijuana. And that's the whole point. I don't
I
want it
think
next to
that's
my
a
home.
stretch myself, but,
Well, that's what our current
We might
ordinance
talk
says.
to a few law enforcement officials.
no, one of them was down the street from where I live.
Yeah.
Right down the street.
Right.
So,
Well,
all right.
Okay, any other discussion?
one other comment, and, it seems to be a spelling error in the, section 11.19, item number 3. If you just go down from the word despite.
You mean the H versus the J?
Yes.
Well, the
I mean-
original state act, it was spelled with an H. So the language that I used was the H because that's what the state law adopted. When this was drafted, there's an interchangeable use of the letter J or the letter H. But by law, by the state law that was adopted, the spelling within that law, the Medical Marijuana Act, was spelled with an H.
That's correct.
So technically,
Nice.
if I were to say there's a correction, it's everywhere that the letter J is used within this ordinance.
Very
But
good.
from a legal challenge standpoint,
Somebody spelled it wrong before.
No, it was, I mean, nerdy history, but it was because that was the Hispanic, that was the Spanish spelling of marijuana with the J because it has the H sound. So when they passed laws against it, they spelled it with an H because that was the English way to spell it.
Thank you.
Total nerd history lesson.
I do have a question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't know that much, so you're obviously more educated on the subject.
Can we limit, I mean, so what we're looking at here is that, say all of us were caregivers, just as an example, and all of us had our, I don't even know, what is it, 5 patients, 6 patients, I don't even know, whatever. What we're saying is, we all can go in, buy a building in the industrial corridor, and whatever, we have 1,000 plants there, whatever that math is, I don't know what it is, but is that what we're saying?
Well, but we're not saying to someone that you have to propagate 1,000 plants. What we're saying is that we have to allow it somewhere, and we're saying it's in the industrial corridor. Whether that's 1 caregiver or 100 is a whole other matter. But certainly we know that there are existing operations in our industrial zone as well as the industrial zones of our neighboring communities that are large-scale grow operations based on utilizing multiple caregivers and multiple licenses.
I'm just saying this so when we have a problem, I'm on the record as saying this is gonna be a problem. Because then everybody runs, oh, we got a lawsuit, we do things because we don't want a lawsuit, and then later on, you know, whatever, somebody comes and changes it, now we're in a lawsuit, and people change their minds, so, whatever.
Any other discussion?
But as far as the rest of the ordinance, I'm fine for if that was separated out, you know, unfortunately.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion to repeal ordinance 306 in its entirety, our zoning ordinance codified as Appendix A, Sections 1 through 23, and to adopt ordinance number 307 entitled zoning ordinance, and to publish a notice of adoption at the Charter Township of Harrison, where the full text may be reviewed in the clerk's office from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. Mr. Witt, will you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Tamanella?
Yes.
Mr. Batati?
Yes.
Mr. Brado is excused. Mr. Capro?
Yes.
Mr. York?
No.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkowski?
Yes. Thank you, Board.
Mr. Supervisor, based on the correction needed to the minutes, Mr. Huth, should we, we need to make a correction to the minutes, but we had already approved them earlier.
Well, it's the same meeting, so you could just make the change and then just have a vote on it.
Make a motion to correct the October 13th, 2015 regular board meeting and public hearing minutes as discussed.
Support?
All right. Got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. York. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll open up the floor for public comment.
Yeah, Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. As you explained, the fact that you did have a workshop meeting with the Planning Commission, I also attended that meeting, and at no time did you have any vote by the Planning Commission that endorsed
Mr.
the change
Supervisor, this
that you
isn't quite
made.
germane to the
That's all right.
minute approval.
It's okay. It's all right.
And as a result, your minutes also reflected that same thing last week. I'm sorry I didn't have them with me. As far as the motion to deal with the yes or no vote by Mr. York, I agree with Mr. York. If he says he didn't vote for it, I agree with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. I apologize to the resident and to anyone else who misunderstood. I'm not suggesting that the Planning Commission voted on this or that we took a vote. We typically don't take votes at workshops, but we did discuss it at length, and
It's not the same.
listen, I let you comment, but please keep your comments. Public comment is closed. So we did not take a vote. If I implied that in some way, I apologize. We discussed it at length, and we discussed the fact that the decision on how to do this is a regulatory decision, and it is one that the board is empowered to do. And if the resident doesn't agree, well, I'm sorry. I guess we just have to agree to disagree.
King, right?
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. York to amend the minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next on our agenda is item E1. regarding the fire chief position. Board members, the contract for Fire Chief Lopez is set to expire November 2nd, 2015. Chief Lopez has been our fire chief for 7 years with no increase to his salary of $85,000. I am proposing a 3-year contract with a 5% increase and no increases for years 2 and 3. There was an attached contract. It was basically the same. I removed section 4C regarding salary rate increases equal to those received by the supervisory union. However, since that time, I provided this board with an amended contract. I also gave one to Chief Lopez and Mr. Huth. There was a discussion from the time that I prepared this contract and added it to the board packet regarding the potential for a merger. And just strictly based on memory, I recalled a clause that was in the contract referring to a 180-day window or period that the township had. And what I'd recalled is it was an ability for the township to basically, opt out of the contract. And my recollection was inaccurate. So in advance or in light of that, I've added one additional section I'm proposing to this contract on the second page. It's item 3C, and it reads as follows. In the event that a consolidation or merger of fire EMS services with one or more municipality results in the elimination of the position of Harrison Township Fire Chief, the township shall give the employee a 90-day notice prior to terminating this contract. In addition, the township shall then provide retiree health care to the employee as defined in Section 8 retirement. The township will pay a percentage of the total premium for this retiree health care coverage equal to 10% times the number of years the employee worked for the township, rounded to the nearest 5%. And board members, you may recall that originally, both the original contract and the original 5-year contract and the 2-year extension referred to a period of 10 years of employment, after which the township would extend retiree health care to Chief Lopez. When we extended it 2 years, the original proposal was a 5-year extension. We proposed to extend it only 2 years, and if the township did not agree after the 2 years, then we would cover 70% of the premium, basically an amount equal to 10% per year. In discussions with leaders from our neighboring communities, we do not believe that any merger is likely to take place and be in effect in a 3-year period. It could be close to 3 years, but in the event that it were to occur quicker than we might anticipate, and let's say it does occur in less than a 3-year period, there is reason to believe that during a transitional phase, there'll be more than Chief Lopez affected by that transition. We're talking about taking almost 300 firefighters spread across 4 different bargaining units, talking about consolidating and combining their contracts. We're talking about other management and administrative personnel in other governmental units involved and resolving all of those. So there's likely to be some consideration for that transition. It would be my guess that item 3C is not likely to ever be utilized, but in the event that there were to be such a merger in a period of time less than 3 years out, we have language that acknowledges and explains to Chief Lopez and to the township how we'd handle that potential termination of the contract and how that would affect the expectation of retiree health care. I don't know if there's any discussion or a motion.
So just help me with the numbers, I guess, for, looking at 3C, employment term, in the event, let's say, 2 years from now, what that last sentence that talks about the township will pay a percentage of the total premium, let's say in 2 years from now, we do have a merger, what kind of money are we looking at? And this would just be towards retiree health care, correct? Item 3C addresses 2 things. Number one, it gives the township the right to terminate the contract.
Okay.
Now, for example, let's say it's important to know, let's say a fire authority was agreed to by all 4 communities.
Correct.
that fire authority, upon the termination of this contract, could extend some other contract to Chief Lopez at that time, but we don't know that, you know, we don't wanna bind any future authority, so we're saying we would have that right to terminate this if we no longer had a need for the fire chief position. So if we went exactly 2 years on this, and it happened to be in November, of 2017, then he would have served a total of 9 years with the township, times 10%, we would pay 90% of his healthcare premiums, and he would be responsible for 10%. If he were to work 9 years and roughly 6 months, then we'd pay 95%.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as well.
Sure.
In terms of wording that, I have no problem with the notion, but do we need to put anything in here in terms of upside caps? I mean, is there anything that we're doing here that we are contemplating in our other retiree healthcare that should be addressed?
I'm not sure that I follow, I'm sorry.
So we just say 90% of or healthcare to be provided, and we do that for other retirees, and I get that. But do we need to cap this in some way, not on a percentage basis, but on a dollar basis? We would be covering at the policies that we offer our retirees,
If
so
you-
that you see what I'm getting at?
In section 8 where it outlines, it gives us the flexibility to change the coverage based on what, you know, similar employees in the supervisory union are receiving.
What
So
section
let's-
are you
it's
referring to?
section
now?
Last
8,
page.
It's the last page.
Yep.
So let's say down the road, we find a more effective way of delivering healthcare product, we would have that right to make a change.
Okay, that's all I'm concerned about.
Right.
All right, okay.
Okay? Okay.
So
and- Go
I
ahead.
have a comment.
Okay.
While I have zero problem with giving the chief an extension, zero problem at all. I do have a problem at this time with a 5% increase, or $4,200. I don't like to deal with percentages. Simply for the fact, and Mr. Tominello brought it up when we were doing the other raises, out of the general fund. This money comes out of the fire fund. I have a deficit in the fire department. Had it for 5 years. We're due to run out of money at some point, early December, middle December. We've ran through all of our savings account. There's, I believe, $56,000 according to the revenue and expenditure report, left in the fund balance there. So I don't know why we're gonna add to that debt. Talked to Mr. Spencer next year, on the budget, we're about $528,000 in the hole still.
That might have
I
been,
don't
that
know.
must have been an old estimate, because it's since been updated based on the decision with the healthcare. It's closer to about
Okay.
200
Well, I
now.
talked to him about 2 weeks ago,
And
so
no,
I'm
I'm
not,
saying,
I'm
say-
not,
No, I'm just saying he revised and it's
I mean,
closer.
those numbers
It's-
come and go.
But it's closer to about 250 now, based on the decision with the healthcare.
Okay, well, that's fine, we're still 250 in the hole. So, 250, now we're 254, 250. I have no problem with this raise, if Sonia brings me a balanced budget plus 4250. I'm great, no problem at all. Let's do it. But until that budget gets balanced, I don't see how we could possibly do a raise at this moment. And you know, if that budget gets balanced, you know, January, February, whatever, I'm fine with that. But doing it right now, until you balance that budget, I don't see how you could responsibly do that. I just don't.
Mr. Supervisor, we're having a discussion now.
Sure.
I,
Yeah, there isn't a motion, but that's okay, we don't always wait for a motion to have discussion.
if you don't mind.
No problem.
You know, I've given this a lot of thought, and, you know, I tend to agree with Mr. York. I would have no problem extending this contract. I think that it isn't so much, really, and I have to say this, it's not so much the $4,200. It's simply the notion that we have a significant problem in potentially improving, or improving, okay? But I would tend to agree with that, and I think that we could get most of the way there, 99% of the way there, but I would support deferring that raise until some future time. It doesn't mean we can't reevaluate in a year. If, I may not be here, but I think that there's good reason to consider that as an alternative motion. I'm just offering that up. Everything else stays the same, but maybe we or some other board reconsiders that at a future time. I'm just offering that up.
I mean, I would my opinion is if November 10th, I'd come back, I'd make a motion to approve it. I'm not even saying a year.
Well, at the end of the year, we're required to have a balanced budget, so, you know, I mean, we'll
Well,
approve it
well,
before
right.
the end
So,
of the
so,
year.
so let's talk about that. What are the options? The options are to take money, whatever it is, $300,000 from the general fund and moving it over to the fire fund, or loaning money, whatever. I don't see how we're ever gonna get our money back, even if we loan it. But that still leaves us pushing into next year. And the other option, you know, obviously, possibly is a millage increase, according to the paper this morning. I think Ken had mentioned that possible fire millage is under consideration for next year. So,
Well, definitely,
I-
a fire millage has to be considered next year because we don't have a millage beyond next year. We have to consider a millage. I mean,
I understand.
our millage literally runs out. A failure to act means we would have $0 to provide police or fire services.
oh, in 2017, but.
Yeah, so literally next year, we have to take a
It's
millage question to the voters.
2017.
Right, so 2016, we have to take a question
Ken.
to the voters.
Ken, I think we both know what I'm talking about. We're talking about your committee that's gonna bring back a millage increase, you know.
We
Mr.
couldn't levy
Sunsack was
we
there.
couldn't levy anything for next year anyway.
Yeah, there is no committee that's my committee. There is a committee that this board approved and formed, and they've discussed several options, and obviously, one of them is a millage increase. But the statement that I made is, we, as a board, have to take some millage question to the voters
For
in
2017.
2016
I understand that.
for the 2017 tax years, or we would have to literally stop providing fire services and police services. And I haven't heard anyone say that we should eliminate either of those. So that's the whole point,
Okay,
is
so
that,
under that scenario, your only option is to drain the general fund X amount of dollars for the fire fund. Under
I
that
don't see
scenario.
that. I don't even know what scenario you're describing, but I'm not sure what the point is. You've made it clear, you believe at this time that a raise isn't in order, and I respect that, and I understand how you came up with that logic. I get it.
But I'm more than happy, the day that budget's balanced, I'm more than happy to make a motion to do it. I wish I could separate the two out, but I can't. Well, I suppose I could.
Mr. Supervisor, so I think everyone knows my position on any kind of raise. As I voiced about a month ago, relative to salaries for elected officials. But I too, I guess I'm just, until we have a deficit either covered by a millage or covered by existing funding, which doesn't look like it's gonna happen, I just really have a hard time assigning any kind of a raise at this time. I do not have a problem with tying it to some type of maybe future balance, or if it's, it could be tied to a millage or any other monies that actually move into the fire fund. But I do have one more question I would like to ask the chief if I may. And I believe 2 years ago, Chief, we talked about this, and there were some things that, there were some issues with the firefighters and some relationships between yourself and the firefighters. And I think when we talked about this a few years ago, I was looking for some relationship building or some team building activities or team building, sponsorship by yourself. Can you please tell me what you've done as a chief to, let's say, mend any kind of ill feelings or, any kind of team building? Because I really need to understand it, because that was a key topic 2 years ago.
Sure. I meet on a monthly basis with the command staff of the department in monthly staff meetings where we have an opportunity to discuss all of the issues pending with the department and forge a path forward. So I try to maintain a good line of communications through the chain of command with the command staff every single month at monthly staff meetings. And I also report back, meet with the firefighters on an incremental basis, sometimes via the video conferencing, sometimes directly in person. In addition, we've had our wellness program, CARE. We've hosted training for all 3 shifts regarding transitions in the workplace and workplace relationships to try to improve morale at the department. But with that being said, I would just also add that we've also spent the last year in an extremely contentious arbitration process that part of my responsibility is to represent the township board and management in that. And that is it was about a year-long, drawn-out, very divisive process that is very challenging for employee morale. And I think that if you went to any fire department in the state of Michigan that's been through a 312 arbitration hearing and has an imposed arbitrator awarded contract, you would hear that morale is at an all-time low in that organization because it speaks to the inability of the management and the union to work together to find common ground moving the department forward. And we're no exception. Morale is not good at the fire department. It's been a contentious year, and it's been a challenge from my seat to run the organization and navigate through that, coupled with, as Mr. York described, the budget challenges that we face, and comments by the union president specific to equipment needs of the department. I agree with them. It's challenging. I think that when you talk, our organization is one that has a great deal of pride, and as the story's been passed on through the generations, the number 1 that's on this patch represents leadership of this department and its progressive nature historically in the fire service. And the last 5 years of budget challenges that we face, that's no longer the case. And our equipment that was once cutting edge and justifying that number 1 on the patch is no longer cutting edge, and we're holding it together. And we've been operating for 5 years with instructions to me at the beginning of the year, knowing that we're going to end the year with a budget deficit. If it's not broke, don't replace it. And that's affected morale. Likewise, with an arbitrated contract, what ends up happening at the end of that is neither side is all that enamored with the results. And there's been some sections of that contract specific to training and my limitations to provide overtime to deliver training that, again, have made it very challenging to provide dive team training, fire inspector training. And so, I respect the comments of the union president when he says that there's a challenge with training. It's true, there is. And unfortunately, my hands are tied with what I can do with that. So I'm doing the best that I can do with the budget constraints that we have, with the arbitrated contract that we have that has put some significant limitations on my ability to provide overtime for training. But I think that we're moving forward, as also was mentioned, the committee that we have in place. I think that's really the pathway forward for the fire department, and Mr. Battanti and Mr. Perkes sit on that, as well as the vice president from the union and another representative from the fire department. And I think that is, a long overdue discussion of the service, an in-depth analysis of the services we provide, the services that we want to provide for the township, and the equipment and staffing that it requires to deliver that service. And that's what we're trying to come up with moving forward. So I think the long-term answer for the budget, for the morale, for everything else lies in all parties working together to determine what is the service that we wish to provide and what does it take to provide the top service for this community and move forward. And I'm spearheading that with that committee, as well as working with the 4-department consolidation committee and working with them to try and find long-term solutions for the problems that we face, because they're very real, and I respect that
the concerns that the union has expressed as well.
But to be fair, thank you, Chief. Oh, to be fair, you know, I think as far as that training, I don't know that that's entirely true what you're saying, because I know Adam, myself and Ken, we sat with the fire union, Andy and Mr. Hood and Mr. Sarr and them, and I thought that we had worked those issues out with training. I was quite surprised, reading the email and looking at the front page of the Macomb Daily today, that would even be in there, because we had sat down for probably 3 hours and discussed all that, to be quite honest with you. So, I mean,
There are some specifics with
and
regards.
you were not there, just
No, right.
for the record.
But in fairness, there are some specifics regarding fire inspector training and dive team training. Those, and I've brought both of those issues to you as well as Mr. Verkest and Mr. Witt, that are very challenging to provide on duty, and the limitations that we have of just allowing on-duty personnel to train and backfilling. There are scheduling challenges with that.
But to say that we've never talked about it is that's not true.
Oh, I didn't. I
No,
don't
I'm
mean to
saying
suggest we
when
didn't
certain
talk
people
about it.
say in the paper that we didn't discuss it, we certainly did.
Yeah, those weren't my comments.
And in all fairness, like I said, you weren't there.
Okay, well, I for one, as a board member, obviously don't have a problem with this, because I brought it forward. But I also take great pride in the fact that we as a board have been able to, well, just like 2 years ago when we addressed this issue, you know, work on a consensus building as opposed to a trying to count to 4 type process. So, let me make sure that I understand from the comments that I've heard from some board members. It doesn't sound like anyone has a problem with the chief. No one has a problem with renewing his contract. And it isn't necessarily, I'm paraphrasing, but correct me if I'm wrong, that isn't a matter of whether this raise after 7 years is deserved or not. It's a matter of the fact that within a budget, even though as large as it is, that it's dealing with a deficit, that it's hard to justify any unnecessary additional spending. Is that fair? Is that a fair?
That's a fair assessment.
I agree with that.
Okay. So I guess I'd like to kind of take this one step at a time. I don't hear anyone opposed to the renewal of the chief's contract, but at this time, there's a concern about any additional compensation, independent of whether or not we believe the chief is deserving of that additional compensation. There's ultimately really this contract, I should say, has really 3 methods by which we compensate the chief. One is salary, 2 is benefits such as healthcare, retiree healthcare, and the third is deferred compensation, in essence a savings plan toward retirement. So I wonder if we would be able to, you know, renew this contract at this current rate, and possibly either at a later time look at some deferred compensation or some increase at such time when this issue is resolved. The problem I have is you know, saying, well, we'll just wait. I mean, it's, in essence, the chief is, you know,
Without something in writing in the contract, we
I
have to
can
have a
assure this
two-sided
board,
contract.
I can assure this board, if this is what I'm hearing you correctly, that, you know, I know a lot of times we just say something and then we forget about it.
no, that's not what I mean.
I will put this item on the agenda the minute that board,
I guess what I'm saying more is this.
I don't know,
Let's-
is that what I'm hearing?
Well, this is what I'm saying. Let's say that if we're able to address the deficit in the fire budget, and we were to come back a year from now with, you know, a better outlook in one form or another, and we said, okay, well, we'd like to extend to the chief a 5% increase at that time for the years 2 and 3 of his contract, and maybe we propose, because we're able to do so, an extra 2.5% or some quantity into his deferred compensation to try to make up for what we weren't able to give him in this year 8 of the contract, right? I mean, but I don't wanna go down that path and find ourselves later down the road and board saying, well, no, you know, that's not the intent. I don't believe we can propose something today that says, well, if this happens, then this, then that. The motion, sounds like the appropriate motion might be to execute the contract at the fee of, or at the cost of compensation of $85,000, but with some acknowledgement that perhaps a year from now, we'd readdress that salary.
So, Mr. Supervisor, I guess my thought is, and I agree, but does it make sense to just renew this at a 1 year? Then that forces it back to us to say, you know, we can look at the health of our budget, firefighters' budget at that time, and that forces it back to us. If we say we're gonna revisit it, if we never do, you know, if we
Well,
do a 3 year and
I
then
got a
never
feeling
do-
the chief might remind us.
Yeah, he's gonna bother us about it.
Right, I don't know that a 1 year renewal is necessary for us to come back and address the issue.
Well, it makes it easier.
I would, if, as long as whatever that commentary is, doesn't bind us.
Right, yeah, I
If it's a
wouldn't,
non-
I
if
wouldn't
it's a
propose
comment-
some revision to the contract at this time.
All right.
I'm hearing the board saying, right now, we're good with 85,000, but we're willing to take a look at it in the future. And I don't know that I can name whether that future is 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months from now.
But I'm fine with that,
Right.
just so you know, if it's a month from now or 2 months from now, I personally, I don't know what the rest of the board is.
Right.
I'm fine with revisiting it that day.
Well, at some point in
You know.
November, we will adopt a balanced budget. We
Well-
have to by law.
Well,
Before
then,
the-
we
you know
look
what I
at-
mean?
then guess
That's-
what? We're gonna be looking at it in November
That's
then
what,
in the
that's what I'm
workshop,
saying.
right?
We are required by law to adopt a balanced budget.
But,
And
but
before
the,
the end of the
So
year.
let's just,
but the
let's not get this wrong.
circumstances that we do that balanced budget by.
Exactly.
No, I know, but that's
could
what I'm saying.
also
It's not,
be
it's not,
pertaining-
show
Not
me a
as clean
balance,
as say
show me a
showing
balanced
a
budget.
budget.
That's all I'm saying.
But that's not,
Right.
that's what Mr. York said.
I
That
wanna
wasn't
make sure we're all on the
necessarily,
same page.
right, it's not
But
about,
but I think we understand
Right,
that it isn't merely a point of saying, well, we slide money from this
Right.
pocket to that pocket.
Right.
We're talking about solving a structural problem.
Exactly.
Understood, and I understand that.
I mean, my opinion is whenever that happens, I'm fine. When it's 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Would it make sense tonight, we have another meeting before the contract expires?
No.
No?
Nope.
No, we don't. Darn. Thought we snuck one in there, but no.
No, I don't see a reason to try to address, I mean, the comments that I'm hearing are saying, well, with as many unknowns as we have in the fire budget, the proposal certainly isn't to eliminate the chief's position, we're not getting anywhere that way. But at this point, to approve, some additional expending, even, you know, 4250 in a $5 million, you know, over $5 million budget, it's a pretty small amount. But I think it's a principled matter and it's not a numerical issue, which to me is totally different. I disagree with that, obviously I put it forward, but I'm not trying to impose my will on this board, I'm trying to form a consensus. So I guess, possibly a motion would be to execute the employment contract for Fire Chief Lopez with a salary of 85,000. I mean, that's the only thing that I'm hearing.
I was just gonna suggest possibly that, that your motion with the additional language, for year 1, year 2 salary to be set next year.
We could do that.
Okay.
We've done that.
I could do that.
That'll force us to at least look at it.
Yes, and,
I hope we're looking at it earlier than that.
Well, we could say
I don't-
what, next year or sooner.
I think you may have a problem amending a raise, giving somebody a raise on a contract that's locked in for 3 years.
Gotcha,
So I think this way you're saying you'll look at it next year.
gotcha. Do we have to name next year or sooner, or, I mean, do we have to name a
Just say-
specific time?
No, you just say for year 2, whenever it is, it is.
But we have the right, as a board, right at any time to give somebody a raise.
Unless he says he doesn't want it.
Right. I mean, we have that right as a board to.
I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay
85,000 year one.
Or sooner.
Yeah, I like that.
A little bit of my concern is that there's, you know, from the old constitutional provision that if you are not obligated to give somebody something and you give them something, it could be challenged. So if you
Would it-
set his salary for 3 years, maybe an issue legally to change it for year 2. And I'm saying
Okay.
this way you wipe out that issue.
Okay.
So I will make a motion
I don't wanna lower
to
this.
offer,
You know, it's not my intent.
Yeah, I don't
Employment
think that's
is in
anyone's
office.
Just
intent.
for the
May not
record, I
Well,
don't
we're
think-
executing the
But he doesn't
contract.
know if he says yes, so, I mean, you know what I mean?
But you direct the supervisor to. If I go to him and he refuses, then I come back to this board and said, hey, I tried to follow your order, right?
What do we say, what's it called, when
Wage
you use in the
reopener?
contract, I don't know, wage reopener, but
Motion to
well,
execute the employment
I don't wanna make
contract
it sound
for
like we
fire
wanna
chief.
lower his,
What-
right?
Yeah, why don't we give Mr. Wood an opportunity to
get
make
off.
that
Motion to execute the employment contract for Fire Chief Mike Lopez with a salary for year one of $85,000 with the year two salary to be determined.
All right, now, just for the record, okay?
Or,
Now, this is what I don't want, is that, once again, the unknown. New board comes in November 20th, they read that language, and they say salary to be determined, $40,000.
correct. With a salary
what I'm
increase
worried
to
about,
be,
yes.
to be considered,
There
right?
you go,
Salary
perfect,
Increase to be.
Good point.
yeah,
Right, and I think,
That's
right?
yeah.
All right, is that a motion, Mr. Witt?
Yeah.
All right, is there support?
I'll support that.
All right, we got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. York, to direct the supervisor to execute the employment contract for Fire Chief Mike Lopez as presented, because I think that's important, it's as presented, with an annual salary of $85,000 in the first year, with a potential salary increase to be considered, for year two. All right?
Why don't you say year 2 and 3? I mean, whatever.
We've discussed it a fair amount. If it's okay with the board, I'll open up the floor for public comment.
Linda Karcheski, resident. I have nothing against the fire chief. We always got along. But before you renew a contract, what I read in the paper, and if this isn't true, what's in the paper, can you please say something today about it? There seems to be a disagreement between the firefighters and the chief. Now, are you addressing these problems before you renew the contract? When there is a disagreement between management and the workers, before we renew this contract, can we find out what the problem is and how it's being addressed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. I've had my differences with Chief Lopez on different issues, especially as they relate to the budget. But I will say this, I feel he does a good job with the limitations that he's got. And I definitely would recommend that you re-up this contract, should he accept it. But I guess I'd also like to understand just exactly, and the lady before me kind of mentioned it, I have a real problem with reading in the newspaper that the firefighters are going to the newspaper and essentially airing dirty laundry that they aired in the past, and it was found not to be a problem. The chief has to work with the limits of the budget. He has to work with the limits of this board. And I really have a problem with the fire people going to the newspaper. I'd like to know whether or not this was done on company time. Did he go after the fact? Other fire chiefs basically limit what can be said by the firefighters on company time. I give Chief the credit. He hasn't imposed that kind of thing, but I think it's time you start imposing it. It's obvious to me that the chief is an outsider. It was mentioned in the newspaper, and they don't like that. And they want one of their own to be the chief. And they think that if they get him out, they will have one of their own to be the chief, namely Mr. Hood. And I think it's time that this board step forward, support the chief, and you start imposing some penalties on these people for going to the newspaper like this. It's crazy. They claimed in the newspaper that we are not safe. I'd like Mr. Hood to expand on that. Only I want him to do it in front of you guys. Where is he tonight? It's ridiculous. Now, as far as, and I was gonna say something, and maybe I won't, but, I also have a problem with basically saying, maybe year 2 is okay, but, the fight to get somebody a raise, when you know, in fact, that you've already got a proposal that you're gonna bring out to the board that's gonna substantially increase the millage, about $1.5 million, by the way, I think is really disingenuous. I really have a problem with that, Mr. Goodcast. So I'll probably comment on that a little bit more as we go to the end of the meeting, but I at least like you guys to support the chief, not only with the contract, but stepping up to the firefighters and making them accountable for the stuff that was said here. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. Unfortunately, I do not believe that we are in a position to be able to share all of the reasons why someone may have chose to make the comments that they did in the paper. I don't agree with them. I think there were some really false statements in there. I don't think it has, I do not believe those statements are appropriate or reflective of the job that the chief is doing. But I, for one, am not gonna stoop to the low of responding and putting something else in the paper or airing out dirty laundry here at the meeting. This is a complex issue, and, you know, each board member, based on their full-time or part-time status and based on their involvement, may know a little more or a little less than others, but it's definitely a complex issue, and it's not one that we're gonna resolve here, and I frankly don't believe it's one that we can expect the chief to resolve. If you have a conflict, you need two sides to work toward a solution. By the mere fact that we had to go to arbitration, that's a pretty obvious sign that two sides aren't communicating well enough. The contract we had prior with a different executive board, we were able to negotiate. It was a concessionary contract, and we negotiated it. But this contract, this last contract, we spent a year, basically in the 2 years that Mr. Tominello referenced, for the first year of the last 2 years of Chief Lopez's contract, we fought across the table using basically every fact and statistic we could to argue against imposing cuts to the firefighters in the contract. Not a popular thing to do if you're a firefighter. After that, the second year of this contract, we've spent implementing all of the cuts that the arbitrator chose. And since the arbitrator really there was really no enhancement in the contract. Every decision he made was to either leave this contract at status quo or impose something that's less than the prior contract had. So now we've spent another year trying to implement all the changes that we've asked and go through grievance procedures and discussions. So, you know, on the best of terms, with the most reasonable of people, that's a difficult process. The fact that we had to go to arbitration is a sign that we're not working across the table. It's not the chief. The chief didn't make the decision to go to arbitration. This board did. So I'd say the chief has the same right to ask us the question, well, gee, how come you guys can't get along with the firefighters? Do you have any team building going on? Well, obviously not if we're going to arbitration. So, you know, we were able to negotiate contracts with everyone else, and we were able to negotiate a contract with a prior group of firefighters, but the current leadership, we were not able to do that. And I don't know that I can pin that on the chief. So that's the most that I can comment in response to the residents and the questions. It takes two sides. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. York to direct the supervisor to execute the employment contract for Fire Chief Mike Lopez as presented with an annual salary of $85,000 in year 1 with a possible salary increase to be considered for years 2 and 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board.
Thank you, board members.
And thank you, chief. Next on the agenda, item E2, regarding DWSD. Board members, the City of Detroit bankruptcy led to a historic reorganization of Detroit Water and Sewer Department. Detroit is leasing DWSD to all of the users in the form of the Great Lakes Water Authority, or GLWA. This will result in greater regional control. A part of this lease process is the reassignment of all of the wholesale contracts from DWSD to Great Lakes Water Authority, or GLWA. There are parts of the lease agreement and the bankruptcy agreement that were unpopular to some of the customers. You may recall that of the various communities, although we all signed, I guess the counties signed the bankruptcy. I'm trying to think of what the various terms were. Memorandum of understanding. We were all allowed, I should say, that each county and the city and the state were allowed to appoint individuals to represent them on GLWA. Our representative is a well-respected guy I certainly have a lot of respect for as well, from Sterling Heights. And when the final lease agreement came out, he felt that there were some ways in which it could have been written better. And so he voted no on that lease agreement in June. There was a lot of discussion as to whether or not we'd have an option to get out, or to make changes, or to effect a change, or basically persuade the bankruptcy judge to reconsider portions of this agreement. But what we found was that one by one, communities executed the reassignment of the wholesale contracts. Macro, we're members of the Macomb area communities for regional something or other, I forget, but basically a group of cities and townships in Macomb County working to try to look at collaboration. At a macro meeting during the late summer, we asked all the attorneys to meet, go pound on the door at DWSD and see if there's any way we can affect a change to the contract. Attorneys came back and said there really is not an opportunity. There's no downside to reassignment. At this point, I believe something like 98% of the sewer customers, 99% of the sewer customers, over 80% of the water customers have assigned this contract. So it isn't as if we get to rally the troops and stand united when we're a small percentage. And we also learned that one of the big potential savings in going from DWSD to the Great Lakes Water Authority is the ability to refinance bonds. The bond market is pretty nervous giving money to the city of Detroit, given their history of fraud, history of poor credit worthiness, and literally bankruptcy. DWSD has a slightly higher rating, but when that debt is transferred, really not transferred at all because we all carry that debt, but when it's literally transferred to Great Lakes Water Authority and all the communities sign on, there's a strong belief by many parties that it'll increase the opportunities to refinance billions, with a B, in debt that we're all basically paying for as users of the system. So the recommendation that we've received, and what a majority of our peers have done, is to pass the resolution assigning the contract from DWSD to GLWA. And that's, even though there's parts of the lease I don't like, we're a pretty small part of this. We do not have the authority to not make it happen. So I don't know, you may have questions for Mr. Huth.
Well, I'm one of these people in this statement that doesn't like this whole thing right from the get-go. I think it's nothing but a cash grab by the bankruptcy judge and the city of Detroit. You know, in my opinion, we've already, in the rates over the last 50 years, we've already paid for a portion of that was a depreciation on the assets. So what we're actually doing is we're actually paying twice. We're actually paying 3 times because on your water bill, Macomb County took over the interceptors themselves, and you can see on your water bill we pay $28, $30, $40 each every 3 months. My opinion was all of that should have been dumped into this consortium since they were, you know, taking over the whole thing. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter what we do, whether you vote yes or no on this, because the judge already said it's gonna happen. The county already pretty much said yes for us. So it really doesn't matter.
Well, the county voted no, for the record.
Well,
The county didn't vote yes. The only,
well then how are we still in it?
because a majority voted yes. But the county did not. It's important to know. Brian Baker voted no on the lease agreement, this past June.
Yeah. So, that's just my opinion. And, you know, bankruptcy judge came out and said, oh, there's only gonna be a 5%, you know, rate increase.
4.
Well, 4?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 4. And all I'm hearing all over the place is 10, 15, some people 20%.
Right.
You know, already they're not abiding by the original, statements, that were made.
Yeah, and actually, the statement by GLWA was a 4% revenue requirement increase, not a rate increase, and believe me.
That's
the
not
la-
what they said on the news.
No, that, if you look at what the, and I did the same thing, because if you looked at what the news said, that's what the news said, because they didn't understand the memorandum of understanding. But if you look at the agreements all say 4% total revenue amount, you know what I mean? So
Increase
when
in
the,
the revenue.
when the press reported it, they say 4% rates.
Well, I can tell you right now, if they had have explained that a little better, I think there would have been a little bit more pushback than there was.
Well, the unfortunate part about this is this really never was a choice that anybody had. The bankruptcy judge has an incredible amount of latitude. And this issue is way more complicated. I think one of the big things that I learned in this is that the one asset, other than the DIA, that the city of Detroit held was its water system. And the bondholders that, you know, that suffered through the bankruptcy saw the Detroit Water and Sewer Department as a significant asset. There was a great deal of interest on the part of private companies to acquire DWSD. I mean, it's in essence saying, hey, DTE Energy is for sale. It's a pretty good buy. If someone said you could buy DTE Energy, you'd say, wow, that's pretty good. I'm pretty much guaranteed to always make money. I get to set a rate that's always more than what I'm spending, which is what DWSD has. There are large systems throughout the country that are controlled by private companies. So those private companies saw the opportunity to say, yeah, we'd love to buy DWSD. Had they bought it, the asset would be gone, and all that asset would have basically transferred to the bondholders, and the bondholders made out real good, and now DWSD and us, the ratepayers, have no say, no control.
No, I don't know about that.
Well, if it goes to a private third party, the idea is that you have no input on the system.
Well,
So
I think the Utilities Commission, just like DTE or consumers, would step in and make sure that the rates are fair. I don't think it'd be an unregulated industry, you know, on
Sure.
setting water rates.
well, the thought was that in essence, the process of reassigning those assets to a third party, in the long run, would be a savings. And again, you know, I'm not saying that I like this or that I agree with this, but this was the reasoning that went into the decisions to get us to where we are today. And, you know, there is a lot of debt that can be refinanced, some of which that has already been refinanced. There is clearly a much better management structure that's in place. There's a lot of efficiencies, streamlining. GLWA and DWSD have held recurring meetings, looking at the ability to close plants, to make other plants more efficient. You know, there's a lot of things that other municipal water and sewer systems have done that this system hasn't done because it's been so poorly managed. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. But in the short term, unfortunately, had this happened 20 years ago, we'd be in better shape today. At some point, I believe this is gonna have to happen in order for us to get to a point when the system is gonna be better managed.
And realistically, this is the illusion of choice as far as assigning the contract, correct? I mean,
True.
I mean, the contract's being assigned whether we say yes or I mean,
Yeah, maybe Mr. Huth can
Correct.
speak to that,
That was
because
my point.
Mr. Huth did a little bit of research on this himself, and
It may not necessarily be assigned. Your current contract is with Detroit Water and Sewer Department. That contract has a provision in there that it permits assignment. We have to agree to it, but our agreement would not be unreasonably withheld. So if we said we don't agree to the assignment from DWSD to Great Lakes Water Authority, that gets kicked back over to the judge, who could say, you know what, you're unreasonably withholding it, so I'm gonna permit the assignment. Or maybe worse yet, and kind of the downside to this is, someone says, you know what, you can stay with the old entity. Everyone else is with the new one. You deal with Detroit Water and Sewer Department. What's your rate? Not sure. What are your terms? Not sure. You don't have maybe the benefits that everyone's getting with the new one. So there's some risk by not taking action. We met, I think, 3 times with the lawyers and even Sue McCormick to try and brainstorm a reason why to recommend not to sign this, and nobody came up with anything good. The only reason that was put forward was it'd be a protest vote. But you're putting your community at risk just to have a protest vote doesn't make sense, so,
Well, for us though,
yes.
we're good. If anything ever happened, I'd just call Mount Clemens. I'm hooked up in a matter of a week.
Well, you're not
It's-
really good though, because you
it's
have a
in
binding
Harrison Township.
contract with Detroit Water and Sewer. What
Not-
could
not-
happen?
Not if they say it's not valid, I don't.
no,
No
but
one's
that's
gonna
what
say
they've,
that.
that's what they've said, is that Detroit would force the contract.
Right.
And so Detroit would sell you the water and continue to do so and honor the contract, but they would ship it through GLWA lines, and GLWA could say, yeah, to get it through our lines to your community, it's gonna add on another 20% because you're not a member of GLWA. That's what I'm saying.
You can't charge more than what it is. Come on.
well, all the research we found said that there's a chance that we could end up paying more by not assigning the contract.
Where's the
And
chance
w-
of getting the next?
Hold
one? I mean,
on, hold on.
no, come on.
And we're talking about, on average, 90% of the communities that have assigned it. So the likelihood that the judge says you're unreasonably withholding it, he's gonna say, well, 90% of the people did it, you guys are being unreasonable, that's my standard. So, I think to Adam's point, this isn't, there's an illusion of choice. I don't believe we have a choice. Having said that, I don't believe that the future is nearly as bad as the past. But in the short term, there's gonna be some management of these costs. Another big one was part of the reason why the rates shot up is because we lost a ton of users of the system when the city of Flint got out. Well, city of Flint's getting back in. We don't know for how long, but that's also going to change the rate structure and model. So
I would think for 10 years or whatever,
Right now
$10
it's-
million or whatever the state's paying, they're gonna.
right
probably
now it's
stay
9
for-
months. The agreement is 9 months. That's
Really?
all that Flint is getting in for is 9
Wow.
months.
You're gonna spend $10 million for 9 months? Wow.
They're prepaying for the rates. I'm not suggesting that their solution will be to get out 9 months from now, but right now, the agreement, I received a copy of it from Sue McCormick. It's a 9-month agreement, so.
Wow.
But the point is that there's a lot of other things that are going on that are having an impact on this rate. But I can say that from the involvement that I've had with the folks that are a part of the GLWA and Sue McCormick and our management team, I have a lot of respect for the people who are managing, including our own representative for Macomb County, Brian Baker.
Well, I'm gonna make a protest vote anyways.
I was amazed to hear you say that. I'm glad you warned me, because now I won't be shocked.
There you go.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the attached resolution regarding assignment agreement with the City of Detroit and the Great Lakes Water Authority to assign our wholesale customer water service contract from DWSD to GLWA.
All right, is there support?
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Batanti with support by Mr. Caprell. We've discussed it long enough. If it's okay with the board, we'll open up the floor for public comment.
Yeah, William Bardell, 18-year resident. I just want to make a quick comment about the city of Detroit. And one of the things that, if anybody would like a homework assignment to understand what actually really happened in the city of Detroit, You could blame it on the interstate highway system, you could blame it on mismanagement, you could blame it on blight, you could blame it on predatory loans, that, you could blame it on nepotism. There's a lot of dynamics. There's not just one dynamic, that happened in the city of Detroit as far as revenues coming in. And I think the last straw that broke the camel's back, well, last two straws, one was revenue sharing by the state, and the second one was the predatory loans that Mr. Kilpatrick had to sign. And so that further pushed them into bankruptcy. And so there's a lot of dynamics. If anybody would like to research that, I think you're going to be very surprised at what you come up with. And there's a lot of factors involved in what happened in the city of Detroit. It's a sad thing that it happened, and I know the downtown's coming back in Detroit, and I'm optimistic, but there's a lot of dynamics in that, and you may, if just for fun, you may want to research that and really find out what really happened in the city of Detroit. It wasn't all corruption. There was a lot more to it than that. And like I said, the last thing that basically broke the camel's back was the unregulated predatory loan that Detroit had to take, which really killed them. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. Any further comments, board members? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Batanti with support by Mr. Caprell to adopt the attached resolution regarding the assignment agreement with the City of Detroit and the Great Lakes Water Authority to assign our wholesale customer water service contract from Detroit Water and Sewer Department to the Great Lakes Water Authority. Mr. Witt, will you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Caprell?
Yes.
Mr. Brado is excused. Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. York?
No.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkowski?
Yes. Thank you, board. All right, next on our agenda, item E3 regarding the administration building with Lance Cruz. Board members, over the last several years, the board has investigated the possibility of acquiring the former Lance Cruz administration building on Jefferson at Lance Cruz. At the most recent workshop, the subject of acquisition cost was discussed. Before the board could make a decision on whether to acquire the building or not, there must be an acquisition cost established. I am asking for authorization to negotiate the cost with a report to come back before the board at a future meeting.
So I'll just ask the question, because this is a different question than what we discussed at the board meeting. Are we basing this on this question, which is just, A, go find out what the cost would be?
Just this question.
Because we didn't discuss that at the board meeting, at
This
the
is one-
I'm sorry, at the workshop.
This is one component of the larger
Yeah,
picture. to
okay,
make
okay,
a
because
decision.
at the workshop, it was said that we're gonna bring it back at this item, and a vote yes for this would be that we're gonna buy the building.
No.
So I
No,
just
no,
wanna
no,
be
no, no.
clear
I-
about.
No, I heard
I
a lot of
think-
comment at that
okay,
workshop
okay.
that said, well, you know, hey, if the price is right, we might want to acquire it regardless of whether or
Okay,
not
that's
we
fine,
move in.
then I'm
Yeah,
fine with that, I don't want my vote
That was a major
to-
component.
to-
We